I tossed my backpack onto the bed, the weight of the day still clinging to me. "You won't believe it," I said, pacing around my room like a madman. My best friend, Liam, lounged in the corner, flipping through one of my comics. "Try me," he muttered without looking up. Typical Liam, never fazed by anything. "They picked me, man. I'm directing the winter musical." Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "You? Peyton? Directing? You're not messing with me, right?" "I'm dead serious," I replied, sinking into the chair at my desk. "Mrs. Robbins just announced it after class. This is it, my chance to finally do something that doesn't involve getting shoved into lockers." Liam grinned, leaning forward. "About time they recognized your genius. But seriously, dude, that's huge." I ran a hand through my hair, still trying to process it. "I know, right? But I can't shake the feeling that this is going to be more than I bargained for." Liam shrugged, always the optimist. "You've got this. Just don't let any of those assholes get to you." I sighed, knowing that was easier said than done. High school had always been a battlefield, with Clark Stewart and his crew ruling the halls. I had managed to avoid them for the most part, but now, with the spotlight on me, I wasn't so sure I could keep out of their crosshairs. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. "A message from Amber. My girlfriend heard you're the new director. Proud of you, babe. Can't wait to see what you do." I smiled, but it faded quickly. With this new responsibility came a lot of pressure, not just to succeed, but to prove that I wasn't the loser everyone thought I was. Liam slapped me on the back. "You're gonna kill it, Peyton. And hey, if anyone gives you crap, just remember Clark Stewart's been dropped on his head one too many times." I chuckled despite myself. "Yeah, I'll try to keep that in mind." But even as I laughed with Liam, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something told me that stepping into the director's shoes wasn't just going to be challenging, it was going to change everything. The next day I walked into the drama room, still buzzing with a mix of nerves and excitement. The place was buzzing, 2 students talking, scripts being passed around, people already debating who would get which roles. I spotted Mrs. Robbins by the piano, deep in conversation with a couple of students. "Hey, Peyton," she called out when she saw me. "Come over here for a sec." I made my way over, trying to look more confident than I felt. "Morning, Mrs. Robbins." She smiled warmly, then turned to the others. "This is Peyton, our new director. He'll be in charge of making this year's musical the best one yet." There were a few murmurs of acknowledgement, but one voice stood out, a low, mocking chuckle. I didn't have to look to know who it was. "Director," Clark Stewart sauntered up, his usual smirk firmly in place. He towered over me, the captain of the basketball team, with his perfectly styled hair and a jawline that seemed chiseled just to piss me off. "They must be scraping the bottom of the barrel if they picked you." I clenched my jaw but forced a smile. Guess they're looking for fresh talent. Clark's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he shrugged. "Whatever. Just don't screw it up. Some of us actually care about this production." Before I could respond, his girlfriend Hannah appeared at his side, linking her arm through his. She was all smiles, but there was a sharpness to her gaze. "Clark's right, Peyton. Don't let us down. We've all got our reputations on the line." "Noted," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But inside I was seething. I wasn't about to let them intimidate me, not here. Not in the one place I finally had a shot at something. Mrs. Robbins, sensing the tension, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, let's get started. We've got a lot of work to do, and I expect nothing less than your best." As everyone moved to take their places, Clark leaned in closer to me, his voice low. "Watch your back, Peyton. I don't think you're ready for this." I looked him dead in the eye, refusing to back down. "We'll see about that." Clark's smirk widened, and he turned away, joining his group of friends, as if nothing had happened. But his words hung in the air like a threat. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but now it felt like a challenge had been laid down, and I had no choice but to pick it up. As the first rehearsal began, I felt a mix of adrenaline and fear coursing through me. Clark Stewart wasn't just a bully anymore, he was an obstacle I had to overcome, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. Rehearsals kicked off in full swing, and it didn't take long for the tension to creep in. I stood at the front of the room, trying to direct the chaos into something that resembled a musical, but it felt like herding cats. Every time I gave a note, Clark would make a snide comment, loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough that Mrs. Robbins didn't catch it. "Try not to trip over your own feet, Peyton. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself in front of the whole school," he'd say with a grin that made my blood boil. And then there was Hannah, who was just as bad, if not worse. Every move she made was calculated, her eyes always on me, waiting for any slip-up. She didn't just play the lead role, she owned it, and she made sure everyone knew it. The way she delivered her lines was flawless, but the moment I tried to give her direction, she'd cut me off. "Don't worry, Peyton," she'd say sweetly, "I've got this. You just focus on whatever it is you do." It was like a constant battle, and I was losing. The rest of the cast could feel it too. The energy in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Liam did his best to keep me sane, offering a quick word of encouragement whenever he could, but even he was struggling to stay upbeat. One afternoon, during a particularly rough rehearsal, I finally snapped. Clark had been whispering something to one of his buddies, and I could see Hannah smirking from across the room. "Clark, if you've got something to say it," I said, my voice louder than I intended. The room went silent, all eyes turning to us. Clark leaned back in his chair, his expression smug, just wondering how someone with no talent managed to land this gig. Must have been a pity pick. Liam, standing next to me, stiffened. I could feel the anger boiling in my veins, but I forced myself to stay calm. "If you think you can do a better job, then go ahead. But until then, shut up and do your part." For a moment, Clark just stared at me, and I thought he might actually get up and leave. But then he laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're cute when you're mad, Peyton. But remember, this isn't your show. It's ours." Hannah, ever the actress, clapped her hands together. "All right, boys, let's not get too heated. We've got a show to put on, remember." But the damage was done. The rest of the rehearsal was a mess. Lines were forgotten, cues were missed, and by the time we wrapped up, I felt like I'd run a marathon. As the cast started to file out, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Robbins watching me, a concerned look on her face. Liam walked up beside me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, Peyton. They're just testing you, trying to see how far they can push." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "They're doing a damn good job of it. If this keeps up, we won't have a show at all." "We'll get through it," Liam said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Just keep doing what you're doing." As we left the drama room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Clark and Hannah weren't going to back down, and neither was I. But with every day that passed, the pressure mounted, and I knew something had to give. The question was, who would break first? The next few days were a blur of rehearsals, each one more exhausting than the last. Clark and Hannah continued their subtle sabotage, making it clear that they didn't respect me or my role as director. I kept pushing forward, though, determined to see this through. But deep down, the constant tension was wearing me down. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Mrs. Robbins called me into her office after rehearsal one day. I knocked on the door, my nerves already frayed. "You wanted to see me, Mrs. Robbins." "Come in, Peyton," she said, her voice unusually serious. She motioned for me to sit down, which only made me more anxious. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, but the knot in my stomach tightened. She sighed, leaning forward on her desk. "I need to talk to you about something important regarding the musical." I nodded, my mind racing with all the possible things that could have gone wrong. "Is it about the set? The budget? Did we lose a cast member?" She shook her head. "No, nothing like that. It's about the cast, but not in the way you think. We've had to make some changes." I frowned. "Changes? What kind of changes?" Mrs. Robbins hesitated, which wasn't like her. "As you know, we've been struggling to fill the male lead role opposite Hannah. There weren't many strong candidates during auditions, so we had to make a decision." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "We've decided to assign the role to Clark Stewart," she said, watching me closely for my reaction. I stared at her, my mind blank for a moment. Clark? The lead role. But he didn't even audition, did he? "No, he didn't," she admitted, her expression apologetic. But the principal and I agreed that it was the best choice given the circumstances. Clark has a strong presence, and with a bit of training, he could be a good fit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Clark Stewart, the guy who'd been undermining me since day one, was now going to be the star of the show. It felt like the universe was playing some cruel joke on me. But Mrs. Robbins, Clark's been nothing but trouble. How am I supposed to direct him when he doesn't even respect me? I know this isn't ideal, Peyton, she said gently, but I need you to try. This is a huge opportunity for you, and I don't want you to lose it because of Clark. You're strong enough to handle this. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. The decision had been made. So, he's the lead, I said flatly, the reality sinking in. Great. There's one more thing, she added, almost as an afterthought. Clark's friends, those boys from the basketball team, they're going to be involved in the musical too. We needed more bodies to fill out the ensemble, and they've agreed to help. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. You're kidding, right? His goons are going to be in the show too. Mrs. Robbins gave me a sympathetic look. I know it's not what you wanted, but sometimes we have to work with what we've got. I believe in you, Peyton. You can make this work. I nodded numbly, barely hearing her words. Yeah, I'll make it work, I muttered, though I had no idea how. As I left her office, the weight of the situation pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. Clark Stewart, in the lead role, with his buddies backing him up, it was like I'd just been handed the keys to a sinking ship. And the worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of Clark's plan, that somehow he was manipulating things from behind the scenes. But I couldn't back down now. I had to find a way to turn this around, to prove that I could handle whatever Clark threw at me. Even if it meant working with my worst enemy, I had to make this musical a success. Because if I didn't, I knew Clark wouldn't just win the role, he'd win everything. The next rehearsal felt like walking into a lion's den. Clark had shown up with his usual swagger, flanked by his basketball buddies who had now somehow become part of the cast. The room buzzed with uneasy energy, everyone aware of the shift in power dynamics. Mrs. Robbins had given me a look of encouragement as I walked in, but it did little to settle my nerves. All right, everyone, let's get started, I called out, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Clark, we'll start with your scene with Hannah. Clark strolled to the center of the stage, his usual smirk in place. Ready when you are, director, he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. Hannah joined him, sliding into character effortlessly, but I could see the gleam in her eyes. She knew this was going to be a test, not just for me, but for the whole production. I took a deep breath and gave them their cue. Whenever you're ready. The scene started smoothly enough, Clark delivering his lines with a surprising amount of intensity. Maybe this could work, I thought, watching him. Maybe he could actually pull this off. But just as I started to relax, the moment took a sharp turn. Clark was supposed to lean in, whisper something to Hannah's character, a tender moment before the big reveal. But instead of whispering, he turned to me, his eyes locking onto mine. In an instant, he closed the distance between us in a few strides, grabbed me by the shoulders, and before I could react, he kissed me. The room fell into complete silence. It wasn't just a peck, either it was intense, passionate, and utterly unexpected. My mind blanked, caught between shock and the sudden rush of sensations I didn't know how to process. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, Hannah stunned, the rest of the cast frozen in place. But it was Amber's face that I noticed most. She had come by to watch rehearsal and stood by the door, her expression a mix of shock and betrayal. Clark finally pulled away, leaving me standing there, breathless and completely thrown off balance. He stared at me for a long moment, his usual smirk replaced by something I couldn't quite read, something almost vulnerable. But then, just as quickly, the mask was back. He let out a loud laugh, stepping back and shaking his head. Relax, Peyton, just messing with you. I stood there, still processing what had just happened, while the rest of the room erupted into murmurs. Liam was by my side in an instant, his hand on my arm. You okay, man? He whispered, his voice tight with concern. Yeah, I'm fine, I managed to say, but I wasn't sure if I believed it. Amber was already halfway out the door before I could say anything. Amber, wait, I called, but she didn't stop. The door slammed shut behind her, and I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. Mrs. Robbins, who had been in the back of the room, rushed over. "What on earth was that, Clark?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Clark shrugged, still grinning. "Just getting into character." "Isn't that what you wanted?" "That was completely uncalled for, Mrs. Robbins said, her voice firm. "This is a professional setting. We don't pull stunts like that." Clark raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Didn't know Peyton was such a prude." I could barely hear them, my thoughts still spinning. That kiss, why had he done it? And why had it felt so confusing? The taste of his lips lingered, and I hated that it did. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Mrs. Robbins turned to me, her expression softening. "Peyton, are you all right?" I nodded, though everything in me felt wrong. "I'll be fine. Let's just move on." But as the rehearsal continued, I knew nothing would be the same after this. Clark had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure how to deal with it or with the mess that was now my personal life. Amber was furious, and who could blame her? And Clark. What the hell was going on in his head? Whatever game he was playing, it had just taken a turn I wasn't ready for. But one thing was certain: I couldn't afford to lose control, not now, not ever. After the kiss, nothing felt right. The rehearsal room had become a battlefield where everyone watched me, waiting to see how I'd react. But instead of confronting Clark, I tried to keep the show moving. It was a bad idea. My mind was a mess, torn between anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Amber didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. I tried to catch her after rehearsal, but she was already gone, leaving behind nothing but a cold silence that followed me home. I shot her a text, then another, but all I got was a single, curt reply: "We need to talk." Liam stuck by my side, as always, but even he didn't know what to say. We sat in my room later that evening, the silence between us heavy. Finally, he broke it. "Peyton, what the hell was that about?" I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. "I don't know, man, it just happened." "But why?" Liam pressed, frustration creeping into his voice. "Why would Clark do something like that? And why didn't you stop him?" I sat up, rubbing my temples. I didn't have time to react. One second he's in character, the next he's kissing you in front of everyone, Liam finished, shaking his head. That's not normal. And it's definitely not okay. I know I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I know it's not okay, but what the hell am I supposed to do about it? I didn't ask for this. Liam softened, his tone less accusatory. "I know you didn't, but you need to figure out what you're going to do. Amber's pissed, Clark's clearly screwing with you, and the whole cast is probably talking about it right now." I groaned, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I don't even know where to start. I just wanted to direct a musical, and now it's all spiraling out of control. Liam was quiet for a moment before speaking again, his voice low. "Do you think there's something more to this? With Clark, I mean?" I didn't want to answer that. Didn't want to think about it. But the truth was gnawing at me. That kiss. It wasn't just a prank. There was something behind it, something I didn't understand, and it scared me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But whatever it is, it's messing with my head. And I don't know how to handle it." Before Liam could respond, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, half hoping it was Amber. But it wasn't. It was a message from Clark. "Meet me after school tomorrow. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, a cold shiver running down my spine. "It's him," I muttered. "What does he want?" Liam asked, peering over my shoulder. "He says we need to talk." Liam's brow furrowed. "Are you going to meet him?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to avoid Clark, to stay as far away from him as possible. But something else, a twisted curiosity, maybe compelled me to find out what he had to say. "Yeah," I said finally, "I'll go." Liam frowned but didn't argue. Just, "Be careful, okay? Don't let him mess with your head more than he already has." "I won't," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The lines between reality and whatever game Clark was playing were blurring fast, and I was losing my grip on both. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the kiss in my mind, over and over, trying to decipher it. I hated that it lingered, that I couldn't just brush it off as some stupid prank. It had felt real, too real, and that terrified me. By morning I was exhausted but resolved. I needed answers, and if Clark was willing to give them, I'd listen. But no matter what, I had to keep my guard up. Because whatever was happening, it was only just beginning. And something told me that meeting with Clark was about to take this mess to a whole new level. The next day at school felt like walking through a minefield. Whispers followed me down the hallways, and every glance felt like a dagger. Amber still hadn't replied to my messages, and I couldn't find her before first period. The tension was suffocating, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything blew up in my face. By the time the final bell rang, I was a bundle of nerves. My stomach churned as I made my way to the back of the school where Clark had told me to meet him. The usually crowded area was empty now, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of traffic. Clark was already there, leaning casually against the wall, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He looked up when he saw me, a smirk playing on his lips, but there was something different in his eyes, something serious, almost uneasy. "Peyton," he greeted, his tone light, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Clark," I replied, keeping my distance. "What do you want?" He pushed off the wall and took a step closer. I wanted to talk. "About what happened yesterday." "You mean the kiss?" I said flatly, crossing my arms over my chest. "What the hell was that, Clark? Some kind of joke?" His smirk faltered, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "It wasn't a joke, Peyton. I wasn't messing around." "Then what was it?" I demanded, frustration and confusion boiling over. "Because it sure as hell felt like you were trying to humiliate me in front of everyone." Clark ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence slipping. "I don't know, okay? It just happened. I didn't plan it." "That's not an answer," I snapped, stepping closer. "You don't just kiss someone like that out of nowhere. Especially not someone you've been bullying for years." He flinched at the word bullying, and for a split second, I saw something raw in his eyes. I know I've been a dick to you, but yesterday, I don't know how to explain it. Something changed. Changed how I pressed, trying to make sense of the whirlwind in my head." Clark hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know, Peyton. It's like, I've always known who I'm supposed to be, the tough guy, the one everyone looks up to. But then you came along and you're different. You don't care about all that crap. You're just you." I stared at him, not sure what to say. This was a side of Clark I'd never seen before, vulnerable, almost lost. "So what? You think that justifies what you did?" "No," he admitted, his voice low. "It doesn't. But I couldn't stop myself. I've been trying to figure out what it means, and I still don't know. All I know is that it wasn't about embarrassing you. It was about something else, something I don't understand yet." I shook my head, the anger slowly draining out of me, replaced by a heavy confusion. "Clark, you can't just play with people like this. Whatever's going on with you, you need to figure it out before you drag me into it." He nodded, looking almost ashamed. "I know. I'm sorry, Peyton. I don't know what I'm doing." For a moment we stood there in awkward silence, the weight of his words hanging between us. I didn't know whether to believe him, didn't know if I could trust anything he was saying. But I could see that he was struggling with something real, something that had caught him as off guard as it had me. "I don't know what to say, Clark," I finally admitted. "This is all messed up. You've made my life hell for years, and now this." "I get it," he said quietly. "And I don't expect you to forgive me, or even understand. But I needed to tell you the truth. Whatever happens next, I just wanted you to know I'm not playing games anymore." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deceit, but all I saw was sincerity. It didn't make this any easier, but at least it felt like something real. "Okay," I said slowly. "But if you pull anything like that again, we're done. I'm not your punching bag, Clark." "Deal," he said, managing a small, almost sad smile. With that, we stood there for another moment, the tension still thick but different now, less hostile, more uncertain. Finally, I turned to leave, my mind still racing with everything that had happened. Peyton, Clark called after me, his voice softer than before. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't reply, just nodded and kept walking. There was too much to process, too many emotions swirling inside me. But one thing was clear: whatever had just happened between us had changed things. and there was no going back to how things were before. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what Amber would say when I finally talked to her. I needed to fix things with her, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure how. And with Clark's revelation still fresh in my mind, I had a feeling that fixing things might be harder than I ever imagined. The rest of the day dragged on, my mind stuck on the conversation with Clark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was teetering on the edge of something huge, something that could either destroy me or, God forbid, change everything I thought I knew about myself. But there was no time to dwell on it. I had another problem to deal with: Amber. I finally caught up with her after school. She was sitting alone on one of the benches near the front of the school, staring at her phone. When she saw me approaching, her expression hardened. "Amber," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" She didn't look up, her fingers still scrolling through her screen. "You've got 2 minutes." The coldness in her voice hit me like a slap. I sat down next to her, but she didn't move, didn't even glance in my direction. "I'm sorry about what happened," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It wasn't planned, I swear. Clark just did it." Amber finally looked at me, her eyes filled with hurt and anger. "And you just let him. You didn't push him away, you didn't even seem surprised, you just let it happen." I was shocked, I protested, trying to explain. I didn't know what was going on. It all happened so fast. "And that's supposed to make me feel better," she snapped, cutting me off. "You didn't pull away, Peyton. You didn't do anything. And now everyone's talking about it, like it's some big joke, like you're some big joke." I flinched at her words, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I hadn't done anything to stop Clark, and now I was paying the price. "Amber, please, you've got to believe me. I didn't want any of this. I care about you, and I never wanted to hurt you." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know if I can believe that, Peyton. How am I supposed to trust you after this? How am I supposed to believe that you're not?" She trailed off, but I knew what she was about to say. The unspoken question hung in the air between us, heavy and painful. Not what I asked quietly, needing her to say it, to get it out in the open. "Not." Interested in him, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not more interested in him than you are in me." The accusation hit me harder than I expected. "Amber, that's not it. I'm not. I don't even know what Clark was thinking, but I'm not interested in him like that." "But you didn't push him away," she said again, her voice trembling. "You didn't stop him, Peyton. And that scares me. Because if you can't even explain why you didn't stop him, then how do I know what's really going on in your head?" I stared at her, feeling the ground slipping out from under me. She was right, I didn't have an explanation, not one that made sense. And that terrified me as much as it did her. "I don't know what's going on, Amber," I admitted, my voice raw with emotion. "I'm confused, okay? Everything's messed up, and I don't have the answers. But I care about you. I don't want to lose you." She looked away, wiping at her eyes. "I need time, Peyton. I need to figure out what I'm supposed to do with all of this. I can't just pretend everything's fine when it's not." "Take all the time you need," I said, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. "I'll be here when you're ready." She nodded, but she didn't say anything else. We sat there in silence for a few more minutes, the distance between us growing with every passing second. Finally, she stood up, and without another word, she walked away, leaving me alone on the bench. As I watched her disappear into the crowd, I realized just how badly I had messed everything up. Amber was right to be angry, to be hurt, and I couldn't blame her for needing space, but the fear of losing her, of losing everything, was almost too much to bear. And then there was Clark. The memory of his kiss, his confession, his vulnerability, it all swirled in my mind like a storm I couldn't control. He was at the center of this mess, and I needed to confront him again. But this time I needed answers. The next day, I found him alone in the locker room after practice. He looked up when I walked in, his expression guarded. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Clark nodded, almost like he'd been expecting this. "Yeah, I figured." I didn't waste any time. "What's going on, Clark? Why did you kiss me? And don't give me some bullshit answer. I need the truth." He leaned back against the lockers, crossing his arms over his chest. "The truth? You want the truth, Peyton? Fine. I kissed you because I wanted to. Because I've been thinking about it for a long time and I couldn't hold it in anymore. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean you've been thinking about it? I mean, I've been thinking about you, he said, his voice calm but intense. About how you're not like everyone else, how you're not afraid to be yourself. It pissed me off at first, but then, I don't know. It started to make me feel things I didn't want to feel. I stared at him, my mind reeling. So you bullied me because you liked me. Clark shrugged, but there was a tightness in his expression. I bullied you because I didn't know how else to deal with it. I'm not good at this, Peyton. I'm not good at that. Feeling things. And now I asked, my voice shaking. What do you want now? I don't know, he admitted, his voice dropping. I just know I don't want to keep lying to myself. Or to you. We stood there in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I didn't know what to do with his confession, didn't know how to process the fact that my bully had been hiding feelings for me all this time. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just about a kiss anymore. It was about everything that had been building between us, everything that had gone unsaid for so long. And now that it was all out in the open, there was no going back, only forward, into whatever came next. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and relief. Amber and I had barely spoken since our last conversation, and the distance between us felt like a yawning chasm. But with Clark, things were different. We didn't talk much about what had happened in the locker room, but the atmosphere between us had shifted, less hostile, more uncertain. Rehearsals continued, and though Clark still carried his usual swagger, there was a noticeable change in how he acted around me. The snide comments were fewer, and when he did speak, it wasn't with that same edge of mockery. It was almost like he was trying to figure out where we stood, just as I was. One afternoon, about a week after our confrontation, we found ourselves alone on the stage after everyone else had left. I was going over some notes, trying to keep my mind on the musical and not on the tangled mess of my personal life. Clark was hanging around, fiddling with one of the props, an awkward silence hanging between us. Hey, he finally said, breaking the quiet. Got a minute? I looked up, wary but curious. Yeah, what's up? He walked over, his usual bravado toned down. I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other day. About you, about everything. Okay, I said slowly, not sure where he was going with this. I meant it, he continued, his voice quieter than I was used to. But I know I screwed things up, with you, with Amber, with all of it. I nodded, appreciating the honesty, but still guarded. Yeah, you did. But I'm not sure what you're expecting me to say. He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost nervous, a side of him I'd never seen before. I'm not expecting anything. I don't want things to stay messed up between us. I want to make it right, if I can. I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge how sincere he was. Why now, Clark? After everything, why do you care? He sighed, leaning against the edge of the stage. Because I'm tired of pretending. Tired of being this asshole everyone expects me to be. You made me realize that there's more to life than just playing a role. And I hate that it took me this long to see it. His words hung in the air. And I found myself nodding, not out of agreement, but out of understanding. I get it, I said quietly. But it's not just about you, Clark. You hurt a lot of people. Amber, me, yourself. Fixing this isn't going to be easy. I know, he said, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that caught me off guard. But I want to try. I'm done with the bullshit. I need to figure out who I am without all of that. There was a long pause as we both took in the weight of his words. For the first time, I saw Clark not as the bully who'd made my life hell, but as someone who was just as lost and confused as I was. Maybe we can help each other, I suggested, surprising even myself. We're both trying to figure things out, right? Maybe we can start by not hating each other. Clark's lips quirked into a small, hesitant smile. I think I can manage that. We lapsed into a more comfortable silence after that, both of us just sitting there letting the moment settle. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. A fragile truce that, for the first time, felt like it could actually lead somewhere better. As the days passed, that truce began to solidify. Clark started showing up to rehearsals on time, putting in real effort instead of just going through the motions. He still had his moments, but the aggression that used to define him was fading. And the cast noticed too. The tension in the room lessened, and for the first time it felt like we were all working toward the same goal. One day after a particularly good rehearsal, Liam caught me as we were packing up. "What's going on with you and Clark?" he asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. I shrugged, unsure how to put it into words. "I think we're figuring things out. It's complicated." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Complicated, huh? You two seem to be getting along better. Almost. Friendly." "Yeah, I guess we are," I admitted, still wrapping my head around it. "It's weird, but I think maybe we both needed to grow up a little." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever it is, it's working. The show's looking better, and you don't seem like you're about to explode every time he's around." I chuckled, appreciating his observation. "Yeah, it's a nice change." As I walked home that evening, I realized just how much had shifted in the past few weeks. The animosity between Clark and me was dissolving, replaced by something that felt almost like respect. And while things with Amber were still strained, I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, I could fix that too. Clark and I were no longer enemies, but we weren't exactly friends either. We were something in between, something new. And in that strange, uncharted territory, I found myself growing not just as a director, but as a person. The musical was coming together, but more importantly, so was I. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path, even if it was one I hadn't expected to take. The night of the musical arrived faster than I could have imagined. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with the kind of electric anticipation that only comes when something big is about to happen. Backstage, the cast and crew were a whirlwind of last-minute preparations, nerves, and whispered encouragements. I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold, a mix of pride and anxiety twisting in my gut. This was at the moment we'd all been working toward. But more than just the performance, this was the culmination of everything that had happened over the past few months. All the struggles, the confusion, the unexpected turns, they had all led to this. Clark was already in costume, looking more focused than I'd ever seen him. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me a nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything we'd been through. I nodded back, the tension between us no longer hostile, but something else, something closer to understanding. As the lights dimmed and the audience hushed, I took my place in the wings, ready to direct the show from behind the scenes. The first notes of the overture began, and the curtain slowly rose, revealing the set we'd worked so hard to perfect. The show went off without a hitch. Hannah's voice soared through the auditorium, her performance flawless. The ensemble hit their marks with precision, and Clark was a revelation. He brought a depth to his character that I hadn't seen in rehearsals, something raw and real that resonated with the audience. It was like watching someone finally step into who they were meant to be. As the final scene approached, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The tension that had been my constant companion was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. This was my show, our show, and it was everything I'd hoped it could be. The last song began, a haunting melody that filled the space with emotion. Clark and Hannah stood center stage, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. The audience was spellbound, and I knew, in that moment, that we had done it, we had created something special. When the final note rang out and the lights faded to black, there was a heartbeat of silence before the auditorium erupted in applause. The cast took their bows, smiles wide and genuine, and I could see the pride on their faces, pride that mirrored my own. As the curtain fell for the last time, the cast and crew flooded the stage, hugging and congratulating each other. I hung back for a moment, taking it all in. This was the culmination of months of hard work, and it was better than I could have ever imagined. Clark approached me, his usual cocky grin replaced by something softer, more genuine. "You did good, Peyton," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "We did good." "Yeah, we did," I agreed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "You were amazing out there, Clark, seriously." He shrugged, but I could see the pride in his eyes. "Thanks, but I couldn't have done it without you. You pushed me to be better, even when I didn't want to be." I nodded, knowing that this moment was about more than just the show, it was about everything we'd been through to get here. "Same goes for you, we both grew up a lot through this." He smiled, and for the first time it didn't feel forced. "Yeah, we did." As we stood there, surrounded by the chaos of celebration, Amber appeared at the edge of the stage. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small, tentative smile. I walked over to her, my heart pounding. "That was incredible, Peyton," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You really pulled it off." "Thanks," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. There was a pause, and then she stepped closer. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us. I'm still hurt, but I don't want to lose you. Maybe we can start over." I searched her eyes, seeing the hope there, and felt a rush of relief. "I'd like that," I said, smiling back. "We'll take it one step at a time." She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like things might actually be okay. Not perfect, but okay, and that was enough. As the night wound down and the auditorium emptied, I found myself standing on the stage, looking out at the empty seats. This place, this show, had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that first rehearsal, unsure of himself and terrified of failure. I had faced my fears, my confusion, and my enemies, and I had come out the other side stronger. Clark joined me on the stage, standing beside me in comfortable silence. We didn't need to say anything, the understanding was there, unspoken but solid. As I looked out at the darkened auditorium, I realized that this wasn't just the end of the musical, it was the start of something new. For all of us. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Clark asked, breaking the silence. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "Yeah, I think I am." And for the first time in a long time, I really believed it.